diminished and sluggish stream. Nothing is more precious here than rain. The wadis fill with living waters. The hills, once so desolate, bloom with fragrance and verdure. The olive, fruit of prosperity, stretches glistening branches in every misty vale. Water can be a fickle blessing sometimes, but here it provides the key to human existence and human history. Jerusalem, captured by the Emperor Titus in 70 A.D., present walls built by the Turks who occupied the city for 400 years. How then do we find the walls of the ancient city, the Jerusalem of King David? Following the clue of water, we discover that David's capital was actually on a lower hill to the south, rising in steep tiers from the bottom of the Kidron Valley. Only later, with the building of Solomon's temple, did the city grow upward toward its present location. Archaeologists were led here because at the very foot of David's city flows Gihon Spring, the only major perennial water source in Jerusalem. The very spring where David's son, Solomon, was anointed king. Later, King Hezekiah carried the vital water supply inside the city defenses by means of a 600-yard tunnel. The northern walls of Jerusalem are close to those of Christ's time, but the ground level has risen because of periodic rebuilding. The Damascus Gate today is some 30 feet above the older Roman gate. Again, the need for saving water can be seen. The gate was arched over to make a storage tank or cistern. These reservoirs, called the Pools of Solomon, were no longer sufficient. They had already served Jerusalem for centuries by the time the early Roman governors had them repaired. They are still serving the city today. The spring of Ain Sultan waters an extensive oasis in the Jordan Valley. Beside it rises a 10-acre mound of debris. The original city of Jericho, one of mankind's oldest walled settlements. This watchtower, 30 feet high, is 9,000 years old, more than 50 centuries before the famous onslaught by Joshua. Amid these ruins from the Stone Age through the Bronze and Iron Ages, one principal interest has been to establish evidence of the Hebrew invasion. For some time it was believed that these were the actual walls brought tumbling down by Joshua's trumpets. But scientific excavation revealed that they toppled 1,000 years before, apparently from an earthquake which destroyed their foundations. We do, however, find an abrupt shift in culture about 1250 BC, indicating Joshua's conquest. The ancient Canaanites had been more sophisticated in their material culture, but more primitive in their beliefs. This tomb from 1750 BC, about the time of Abraham, shows the burial of a wealthy Canaanite family. The principal adult figure is lying in the foreground on a collapsed wooden bed, his right elbow resting on a table which contains a tray of food to keep him nourished in afterlife. Beneath the floor of Stone Age houses were found these clay-covered skulls, complete with eyes of inlaid shell. As portraits, they probably indicate ancestor worship. The word Hebrew originally denoted donkey caravaneer. To the Canaanites, the nomadic tribe of Abraham must have appeared as vagabonds. These newcomers camped in tents, much as do the desert herdsmen of today. The evidence about Abraham is not material, but spiritual. We We can only speculate about his history. When he first immigrated from Mesopotamia, we learn in Genesis that Abraham stopped here in Shechem to build an altar to the Lord. He may well have walked through these same city gates. Shechem gained religious importance. Jeroboam made it capital of Israel in 922 BC. Toward the end of his life, Abraham came to Hebron, where he purchased the land upon which this mosque now stands as a burial place for his family. Machpelah is revered equally by Muslims and by Jews. Of the Hebrew patriarchs, we have scant evidence, but with David and Solomon continuing through the later Greek and Roman occupations, we can increasingly relate what we find in the ground with what we read in the Bible. In Bethlehem, perhaps in a cave beneath this church once used as a manger, a child was born in the beginning of our era. He attracted a devout following, many from Greco-Roman cities like the New Testament Philadelphia, Greek for brotherly love. Today, Philadelphia is Amman, the capital of Jordan, but then it was a desert outpost of Greco-Roman culture. From Canaanite to Roman, this land depended for its sustenance upon the modest Jordan. For 200 meandering miles, it spreads a rich swath of green across the arid hills. By the time it approaches the mountains of Moab, the Jordan is exhausted. Only a muddy trickle flows sluggishly across the salt flats into the vast reaches of the Dead Sea. But water, even such bitter dregs as this, attracted settlement along its banks. In the century before Jesus, an obscure band of Jewish votaries isolated themselves on this plateau, cut off from Jerusalem by the jagged bluffs rising 1,000 feet to sea level behind them. They built a monastery above the salty Badlands and lived a sternly disciplined existence, studying, praying, copying religious manuscripts. We believe they were the sect known as Essenes. John the Baptist may have been influenced by them. They too practiced baptism, which required a great deal of fresh water. An elaborate network of cisterns captured the winter floods from the mountains. The same mountains and ravines also provided a number of secret hiding places. Caves where religious manuscripts could be cached in dangerous times. In 1947, a Bedouin shepherd boy named Muhammad chanced upon a hole in the cliff. He explored it and found a number of clay jars full of ancient scraps of leather, which he brought to a Bethlehem shoemaker named Kando, who might use the scraps to mend shoes. Today, the poor cobbler is a wealthy merchant, for these were no less than the first of the Dead Sea Scrolls, copies of the Bible 1,000 years older than any major Hebrew versions heretofore known. One of the great archaeological finds of the 20th century, evidence of the remarkable accuracy of biblical transmission. In archaeology, however, you usually find only what you look for. Here, the University Museum of the University of Pennsylvania was looking for the Old Testament city of Gibeon. When they found it, they could scarcely credit the evidence. It seemed too obvious. For in this pool were unearthed dozens of jar handles inscribed with the name Gibeon itself, and names of persons known in the Bible, like Hananiah. The giant pool with spiral staircase leading 80 feet to the spring was strong confirmation. This was possibly the great pool of Gibeon, beside which the forces of Saul and David battled for the kingship of Judah and Israel. Really a gigantic well, leading to the precious water supply deep within the hill. The startling inscriptions came from discarded wine jars. As these extensive storage vats prove, the city was an important wine-producing district. Inscribed on the clay jar handles, Gibeon was then a mark of prestige. But today the people of El Jib, as Joshua prophesied, are little more than hewers of wood and drawers of water. Over the centuries, Palestine was swept by many armies and populations. Here in the old Israelite capital of Samaria, the castle which the powerful King Omri built and to which he moved his court is now a hilltop pasture. Scarlet wildflowers mark the steps of painted Jezebel, the hated Phoenician queen, who worshipped so fanatically the pagan god Baal. In 721, Israel fell to the Assyrians, then to the Babylonians, then to the Persians, and then to the Greeks, who ruled for more than 200 years before they too fell to the Romans. King Herod built a temple honoring his friend Caesar Augustus, for whom the town was renamed Sebastia, meaning Augustus. 300 years later, the power of Rome passed to Constantinople. The Byzantine Empire was born. The Byzantines freely robbed Roman temples to construct Christian churches. Here, Helen, mother of Constantine, commemorated the finding of St. John's head. The celebrated head of John the Baptist, danced for as a prize by Salome. Palestine occupied a strategic position between Egypt and Mesopotamia. We find ruins embodying every influence, often, as in Samaria, intermingling, overlapping. Tracking this physical evidence, tracing a background for recorded history, this is the challenging road followed by the archaeologist. Not a natural hill, but a tell, a mound of ruins 138 feet high. Since 1964, the University Museum of the University of Pennsylvania has been excavating this tell in the land of Gilead. Directing the staff and work crew of more than 100 men is Dr. James B. Pritchard, discoverer of Gibeon, a distinguished authority on biblical archaeology.
We're standing here on the top of Tel Saadia in the Jordan Valley at an elevation of 761 feet below sea level. Below us, there are remains of at least 5,000 years of human history, which we are trying to write. So far, we have succeeded in uncovering at least 7 different cities superimposed upon the earliest. The reason for choosing this particular site rather than one of 200 other sites available in the Jordan Valley is that it is the largest city and is probably mentioned in the Bible by the name of Zarathan, a site which was important in the history of the building of Solomon's temple. There we read that Solomon had the bronze for the temple cast in the plain of the Jordan between Zarathan and Succoth. Our first main discovery was a long stairway leading from inside the old city walls down the northern slope of the tell. This was a civil defense measure dating from about the time of Solomon. The stairs were once a secret tunnel, roofed over and camouflaged, so that in time of siege, the inhabitants still had access to their all-important water supply, the spring at the base of the tell. At the very top of Tel Saadia, we uncovered a palace of the Persian period, some 500 years later. The rich farmlands of the Jordan Valley probably provided the owner of this palace with the principal source of his income. He built himself an imposing structure with rooms on 4 sides and a large paved courtyard efficiently drained by stone conduit. So we see intelligent planning and a high degree of organization extending over many centuries. In digging through ancient cities, it's necessary to keep track of the floor levels through which one cuts. Here you have the standard procedure giving the exact situation in which the material was found. In this balk, we have the tags of 4 floors. This is difficult to see. This is a burned level, and this is a plaster floor. By means of this device, we can keep track of the artifacts which come from each of these levels. As we peel off the successive layers of this city, we must carefully survey and chart each one. These detailed maps form a permanent record. This cut into the hill was made by men using picks, hoes, and sometimes instruments like knives and brushes. It was not done by a bulldozer, which would, of course, destroy every bit of evidence which we wish to record. House floors are usually of hard-packed earth. They can be discovered only by a practiced sense of touch. The customary building material was mud brick, extremely difficult to separate from the surrounding rubble. But careful excavation has revealed the foundations of more than 20 houses dating from the 8th century BC. 12 of these houses have exactly the same plan and measurements. A simple mortar for grinding grain, a dome-shaped clay oven for baking the family bread. The house floor is lower than the street level outside because the street built up more rapidly from rubbish, from pebbles and silt washed down by the rain. We believe some houses were privately owned because of slight variations. This owner protected his house front with stones to guard against erosion. To my right, we have the first attempt to get below the 8th century, and we're now in the 9th and possibly 10th century BC. On this level, approximately contemporary with Ahab's reign in Samaria, we found half a dozen houses smaller than those above them, but having the same general interest. What we're really interested in this area is to find a rather remarkable culture, which we first discovered in the cemetery over beyond this hill in 1964. We uncovered a group of tombs dating from 1200 BC, containing finely worked bronze and beads of gold and carnelian. When we reach the living level here, we should find comparable objects and a great deal of information, which was not available in the cemetery. Since we must remove the 8th century houses, we decided to build an exact replica of one of them on the top of the tell. Using earth from the dig, we made our own mud brick just as it had been made in the 8th century. The mud and straw mixture is poured into a simple wooden mold and left to dry in the sun. Mud is also used for mortar. The interior pillars are mud brick too. The roof beams are made of local wood. An inelegant but useful combination, dirt and water. We can plant our crops in it, we can make pottery out of it, and as you can see, we can even build a house with it. With moderate maintenance, it'll last for years. Following our 8th century model exactly, we'll add a roof of reeds from the nearby Jordan, and we'll cover that with a thick coating of mud. Life in this 8th century house was surprisingly comfortable. Cool in the blistering hot summer, warm in winter, quite agreeable even to our own standards some 2,700 years later. Potsherds are often called the basic alphabet of archaeology. Scattered on the ground, they indicate a promising site. As we dig, they provide the most convenient method for dating what we find. Baked clay is practically impervious to flood, fire, and age. Because clay is an unusually plastic medium, pottery has evolved into many shapes over the centuries. These distinctive forms give us our indispensable pottery calendar. The sherds from each plot are brushed and washed in plain water. After the bits of pottery are dried, we go over the day's collections, searching out diagnostic forms, shapes significant of a particular period. Back at our camp, we catalog these important pieces and restore as many as we can. Reassembled from dozens of scattered fragments, this will eventually go to a museum. A vase imported from Cyprus about 1300 BC. This stirrup vase held some precious liquid, possibly Greek perfume. Foreign trade was practiced even before the time of Solomon, not only with the Greeks, but with the Egyptians, who perfected faience ware like this. A particularly beautiful alabaster goblet, also Egyptian in form. From our 13th century tomb culture, a handsome bronze tripod. And this royal wine tasting set is further evidence for a high skill in working bronze. An exquisite little gazelle's head, 3 inches high, originally the handle of a cup. Telesardilla is fulfilling its promise. The history of an important biblical city is emerging. There are a lot of hardships here. There's some signs and a good deal of hard work, but there's also a lot of fun of discovery. To believe that there are ruins under a hill and to find them are one of the greatest adventures that one finds in archaeology.
Archaeology, the exploration of the past. The treasure of archaeology, knowledge. But in such institutions as the Palestine Archaeological Museum are assembled some tangible riches of excavation. Superb ivories from Samaria in the time of the iniquitous Queen Jezebel. Older and even more remarkable, the famous Megiddo ivories dating as far back as the time of Moses. A jewel box 5 inches square carved with lions and cherubim. The most interesting piece, a foot-long plaque, a Canaanite warrior delivering prisoners to his monarch. Here, a rare example of reference to a biblical city from a non-biblical source. Beth Shan, carved on an Egyptian stela. From Beth Shan itself, a sculptured basalt panel more than 3,000 years old, excavated by the University Museum. In its own galleries, the University Museum exhibits a collection of biblical artifacts, including many from Gibeon and Beth Shan, like this clay sarcophagus dating from the time of Saul. But by right, the great portion of discoveries remain in the country where they are found. The copper scrolls from Dead Sea caves, a fabulous inventory of gold and silver bullion supposedly hidden about the Holy Land, reside in the National Museum in Amman. From the land of Moab, where Moses was buried, a 9th century coffin. The desert kingdom of Ammon, a painted limestone statue from the Iron Age. From Sahab near Amman, this particularly handsome portrait head, the lid of a sarcophagus. Persephone, a Greek goddess worshipped at Sebastia. Tyche of Philadelphia. Bearded Zeus himself from the fine Roman ruins in Jerash. The exquisite grace of Aphrodite, bathing. Only 8 inches high. So the use of the spade is not merely to uncover picturesque and curious ruins from antiquity. Archaeology seeks perspective, background, understanding, that we may better interpret the mainstream of Western civilization. The historic events so powerfully represented in the book itself, the Bible.